It started like any other day. Morning light filtered through the blinds, the smell of coffee faintly filled the air, and the usual clatter of cereal bowls echoed from the kitchen. But she didn't say a word. Not good morning, not a nod, not even a glance. Just walked past me like I wasn't there. I watched her pour milk into the kids' bowls, not mine. The silence wasn't new, but today it cut deeper. I asked her if she had plans for the day. She didn't answer. Just looked at her phone and scrolled. I asked again. Anything happening today? Still nothing. Just the hum of the fridge and the soft clink of her spoon against ceramic. The kids looked up at me, confused. My son whispered, "Is Mommy mad again?" I didn't have an answer. I just smiled at him like everything was fine. But it wasn't. It hadn't been for a long time. Years ago, she used to laugh at my jokes. She used to reach for my hand when we walked. She used to cry on my shoulder and kiss my forehead when I was stressed. But somewhere along the way, the connection frayed, then snapped. I don't know the exact moment it happened. Maybe it was gradual. Maybe I missed the signs. Or maybe I didn't want to see them. But today was different. Today wasn't about one silent morning. It was about the accumulation of thousands of ignored words, unspoken disappointments, unmet efforts. It was about all the times I swallowed my feelings so we wouldn't fight. About the emotional labor I carried alone while she drifted farther away with every glance at her phone, every cancelled date night, every forgotten "I love you." When she left for work without saying goodbye, the house fell quiet. Not peaceful quiet, empty quiet. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the dent in the wood I made years ago when I was building a high chair. I remembered how excited we were to be parents. How scared. How ready. How united. But things changed. She changed. Maybe I did too. But I tried. God, I tried. Every single time she pulled away, I leaned in harder. Every time she snapped, I softened. Every time she ignored me, I gave her more attention, thinking maybe this time she'd notice. She never did. I thought of the night before, how I made her favorite pasta. She didn't even taste it. Just picked at it while texting someone, then went to bed. No. Thanks. No. Good night. I lay next to her that night and stared at the ceiling, wondering how we got here. Two strangers in the same bed, breathing the same air, living different lives. I'd hoped today would be different. I had no reason to think it would be, but I hoped anyway. That's what I did, hope. Hold on. Wait. Endure. But hope without effort is just cruelty. And I was tired of being cruel to myself. I stood up, walked to the hallway, and opened the closet. I pulled out a duffel bag and started packing clothes for the kids. Not in a rage. Not out of spite. Just clarity. I packed their pajamas, favorite books, the little nightlight shaped like a moon. I folded everything neatly. Then I packed my own bag. No theatrics. Just movement. I left her a note. I didn't pour my heart out. I didn't beg her to call. I didn't make threats. I just wrote. I needed to be seen. You chose not to look. I'm taking the kids for a while. We're safe. Please don't come by. I'll call you when I'm ready to talk. And next to the note, I placed a shoebox. Inside were the letters. Every single one. Birthday letters. Anniversary letters. Letters after fights. Love letters. Letters I wrote when I couldn't say what I needed to out loud. Some typed. Some written by hand. Some crumpled from being carried in my pocket for days before I dared to leave them on her nightstand. She never mentioned a single one. I left the box open, so the top letter could be seen. The one I wrote last year. I don't know if you love me anymore, but I still do. And it's killing me. I looked around the house one last time. The photos on the walls. The artwork from the kids. Her favorite mug on the counter. None of it felt like mine anymore. I picked up the kids from school early. They were surprised but excited. I told them we were taking a little trip. Somewhere quiet. Just the three of us. As we drove away, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved. I felt hollow. But inside that emptiness, there was a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Dignity. She didn't see it coming. And maybe that's the saddest part. Not that I left, but that she never thought I would. That she had neglected me for so long, so consistently, that my absence shocked her more than her own behavior ever did. She thought I'd keep enduring. She was wrong. I never stopped writing her. Even after the conversations died, the arguments stopped, and the silence became routine, I kept writing. Not because I thought it would fix things, but because it was the only way I could still hear myself. When someone stops responding, you either go quiet or start talking to yourself. I chose the latter. The first letter was simple. It was after our third fight in 1 week. I didn't want to escalate anything, so I wrote down what I was feeling instead. I told her I was scared. Not of her temper, but of how cold she'd become. I placed it on her pillow. She never mentioned it. Maybe she didn't see it. Maybe she saw it and didn't care. But I kept going. Every time we had a breakdown, I wrote. Every time we were in the same room but miles apart, I poured myself into paper. I wrote when she turned away in bed. I wrote when she canceled plans without explanation. I wrote on anniversaries when she forgot them. I wrote instead of yelling. Instead of begging. Instead of falling apart in front of the kids. I didn't just write about the pain. I wrote about the memories, too. The beach trip where she kissed me under fireworks. The time she stayed up all night with me during my father's funeral week, rubbing my back in silence. I clung to those like lifelines, convincing myself the version of her I fell in love with was still buried somewhere. Every letter I wrote, I imagined she'd read it and feel something. Maybe guilt. Maybe tenderness. Maybe a flicker of the girl who once used to write me notes just to say she missed me. But the letters kept piling up, and her distance only grew. It became clear that I wasn't writing to reach her, I was writing to preserve myself. I remember one night in particular. It was raining. We were sitting on opposite sides of the couch. I wrote a letter that night that said, "I'm sitting right here, but I've never felt further from you. It's like you built a wall and left me outside in the storm." I left it in her purse. Weeks later, I found it still folded where I placed it. Unopened. That was the night I stopped believing this marriage could be saved. People talk about betrayal like it's an affair, a scandal, a dramatic collapse. But the slow kind? The kind where someone just stops showing up emotionally? That kind is quieter. But it's just as lethal. It's betrayal by erosion. Bit by bit, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but a shell of what once was. I wasn't perfect. I had flaws. I shut down sometimes. I got tired. I made mistakes. But I always came back. I always tried. I was present. I listened. I compromised. And I gave her everything I had, until I realized I was giving it to someone who stopped wanting it. The irony is, she accused me once of being too emotional. Like caring deeply was a weakness. Like wanting to connect made me clingy. But I'd rather feel too much than nothing at all. At least I know I showed up. At least I know I didn't just exist in our home, I lived in it. There was a letter I never gave her. I wrote it a month before I left. It was too honest, too raw. It said, "Every day I look at you and wonder if you're just waiting for me to leave so you don't have to do it yourself." That one stayed tucked away in the back of the box. I didn't expect her to read all the letters after I left. Honestly, I wasn't sure she'd even notice the box. But I left it open anyway, just in case. If there was any shred of the woman I once loved still inside her, I hoped it would stir something. Not so she'd chase me down. Not so she'd beg me back. Just so she'd understand. Understand that she didn't lose me in a single moment. She lost me every time she chose silence over conversation. Every time she rolled her eyes at my attempts to connect. Every time she ignored the pain she could clearly see and decided not to ask about it. By the time I packed the kids' bags, I had nothing left to give. No anger, no outburst, no final plea. Just the truth. She didn't want to hear it when I was there. Maybe she would now that I was gone. People love to ask, "Did you try everything?" I did. I wrote the truth when my voice shook too much to say it. I stayed when every instinct told me I was slowly disappearing. I prioritized her, the kids, the family, until there was barely anything left of me. And still, I stayed. Because I believed love was something you fought for. And it is. But both people have to be in the ring. I was swinging at shadows. Holding on to air. Loving someone who had already left emotionally, even if her body was still in the room. So no, I didn't leave on a whim. I didn't take the kids because I was angry. I left because I realized that staying was teaching them the wrong lesson. That love means sacrifice, yes, but not self-erasure. That commitment matters, but not at the cost of your dignity. That trying hard is noble, but not when it turns into begging to be seen. The letters weren't for her anymore. They were for me. Proof that I cared. That I tried. That I poured my heart out instead of shutting it down. That I didn't just vanish into silence like she did. That I stayed until staying meant breaking myself into smaller and smaller pieces. In the end, all I ever wanted was to be heard. To be acknowledged. To be met halfway. I wrote because I believed she might still be reachable. But sometimes, people don't come back. Sometimes, they don't read the words. Sometimes, they stop seeing you the moment they think they've got you for good. And when that happens, you don't write to fix things anymore. You write to say goodbye. The house was too quiet when she got home. No shoes by the door, no backpacks slung over the chairs, no sound of cartoons in the background. At first, she thought maybe we were out for ice cream or at the park. It wasn't until she stepped into the kitchen and saw the note on the table that she paused. She read it twice. Then again. Her hands started to shake, not with panic, but confusion. She had grown so used to me being there, to me staying no matter what, that the possibility of me actually leaving never occurred to her. Her eyes drifted to the shoebox beside the note. She opened it out of instinct, not curiosity. The first letter lay on top, the date from 2 years ago staring back at her. She unfolded it and started to read. By the third paragraph, her mouth went dry. There I was in ink. Unfiltered. Hurting. Hoping. Reaching. She sat down without realizing it, letter still in her hands. And then she reached for another. And another. And another. It wasn't until the fifth one that she cried. Not loud sobs, not the kind you see in movies. Just quiet tears slipping down her face as the words she never let herself hear poured out in black and white. Words I wrote while she scrolled. While she sighed. While she brushed past me in the hallway like I wasn't there. She had convinced herself I was fine. That I was strong enough to absorb the silence. That I understood she was tired, stressed, busy. That I'd always be there, no matter how cold she got, no matter how distant. And I was. Until I wasn't. She never expected it. Not because I didn't have reason, but because she thought her neglect was invisible. That her withdrawal didn't leave bruises. That emotional absence couldn't make someone leave. She was wrong. Letter after letter showed her a version of our marriage she never bothered to see. Not because I didn't try to show her, but because she chose not to look. Chose to believe that my silence meant satisfaction, that my quiet presence meant I was okay. She had convinced herself I'd never leave because I never threatened to. I didn't yell, didn't break things, didn't give ultimatums. I just tried, and when that failed I kept trying. But trying is a finite resource. And I had run out. Reading those letters forced her to face a truth she had avoided for years. Love doesn't survive on autopilot. And a partner's patience doesn't last forever, not even when it's deep. Not even when it's real. She thought about all the nights I lay awake next to her while she turned her back. All the dinners I made that she never ate. All the conversations I initiated that ended with her scrolling through her phone. Every small rejection added up, and the letters captured it all. She read the one I left in her purse. The one she found weeks later and never opened. It was still folded exactly how I left it. Now, holding it, she realized just how much she had ignored. Not just my words, but my presence. My needs. My slow unraveling. For the first time, she didn't feel justified. She didn't feel like the victim. She saw herself clearly, as someone who let love decay out of apathy. Not because she stopped caring, but because she assumed love didn't need maintenance. She thought comfort meant permanence. She was wrong again. She pulled out her phone more than once to text me. Then put it down. What could she even say? That she was sorry? That she didn't know? That she finally understood? But understanding after someone's gone isn't a remedy. It's just another form of pain. She walked through the house, suddenly noticing everything. The absence of toys. The quiet rooms. The unmade bed. For the first time, it felt empty in a way that mattered. Because the one person who had stayed even when she gave him every reason not to, was finally gone. She walked past the bathroom door and remembered the time I left her a note on the mirror that said, "You're beautiful, even when you don't feel it." She had smiled, she remembered now, but never mentioned it. Never thanked me. Never even looked my way that morning. She just washed her face and went on with her day. That memory gutted her. Because it wasn't the big gestures she missed, it was the small ones. The steady, consistent efforts I made to keep us alive while she slowly checked out. She hadn't even noticed when I stopped trying. She'd been that disconnected. And now? The silence was louder than ever. She didn't know where I went. I hadn't told her. That wasn't out of cruelty, it was protection. I needed space. I needed time. And she knew better than to chase after me with apologies she hadn't earned yet. What she realized sitting alone in that house wasn't just that I had left, it was why I left. And that was harder to swallow. Because when someone walks away after begging to be heard, it's not a whim. It's a final act of self-respect. She kept reading until her eyes blurred. Until the letters were scattered around her like pieces of a past she had ignored in real time. Every sentence was a mirror she couldn't look away from. Not anymore. She realized something else, too. It wasn't about whether I loved her, I had. Deeply. Fully. Even painfully. But love without reciprocity becomes martyrdom. And she had let me bleed alone. So she sat there, surrounded by my words, facing her own reflection for the first time in years. Not the one in the mirror, but the one shaped by silence, neglect, and quiet betrayal. And for the first time, she didn't wonder why I left. She wondered why I stayed so long. The days after I left were quieter than I expected. No calls. No texts. No sudden messages begging me to come back. I didn't know if she was processing or punishing me with silence. Either way, I didn't reach out. I had nothing left to explain. Everything I needed to say had already been written and left behind. She could find the truth in the letters I poured my soul into. The kids adjusted faster than I thought they would. They were confused at first, but not broken. That alone told me something. They had felt the tension too. Even young hearts can sense when a home stops being safe. And now, without the weight of her mood filling the rooms, they laughed more. Played louder. Looked at me with less hesitation, like they knew I wasn't on edge anymore. I didn't badmouth her. I answered their questions with care. "Mommy's at home right now. We just need some space." That was the line I repeated, not for their comfort, but for mine. Because part of me still wondered if there was a version of her who'd wake up, who'd realize the damage, who'd try to fix it not out of panic, but from a place of real remorse. But as each day passed without a word, that hope started to fade. I rented a small place, nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms. Quiet neighborhood. I made it warm. Not with decorations, but with attention. With presence. I started cooking again. The kids and I made pancakes in the mornings and played card games before bed. There was laughter again. Real laughter. The kind that doesn't have to tiptoe around emotional landmines. I thought I'd feel lonely. But what I felt more than anything was relief. I could breathe. I didn't have to second-guess every word, every silence. I didn't have to measure my worth in the number of sighs she gave when I spoke. I didn't have to wonder if I was too much or not enough. I was just me. And for the first time in years, that was okay. A part of me still checked my phone more than I'd like to admit. There was a part that waited. That maybe she'd call and say something real. Not, "I miss you." Not, "Come home." But, "I see it now. I see what I did." But silence has a way of answering questions you don't want to ask out loud. And it became clear, she wasn't ready to take accountability. Maybe she wasn't even ready to admit there was anything to be accountable for. It wasn't about villainizing her. It never was. People grow distant for all kinds of reasons: stress, resentment, fear, or plain neglect. But at some point, intention stops mattering. At some point, the damage becomes more real than the excuse. And I had lived in that damage long enough. I started therapy. I didn't go because I felt broken. I went because I didn't want to carry the patterns with me into whatever came next. I didn't want bitterness to become my new language. I wanted clarity. I wanted to understand why I stayed as long as I did, what I missed, what I ignored, what I was responsible for. The first thing my therapist asked me was, "When did you stop feeling seen?" I answered before thinking. When I realized she was more interested in her silence than in our survival. That truth hurt more than I expected. Because I'd made peace with the fact that she changed. What I hadn't made peace with was the way I let her change me in the process. I'd become smaller. Quieter. Numb. And that wasn't love. That was endurance. But I wasn't angry anymore. Not even sad. Just awake. For the first time in years, I was awake. I looked at myself in the mirror differently now. Not like a man who lost his family, but like a man who reclaimed his voice. I wasn't just a husband, or a father, I was a human being. I mattered too. My peace mattered. My presence. My joy. And once I started believing that again, everything else shifted. The kids saw it. They started talking more. Opening up. Telling me stories without looking over their shoulders, as if afraid someone would snap at them. We made a list of things we wanted to do together. Little things: movie nights, camping in the backyard, baking messy cakes. For the first time, I wasn't parenting under a cloud. I was parenting in the sun. I stopped checking my phone after that first week. If she wanted to talk, she knew how. But I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't holding space for someone who didn't know what to do with it. I wasn't hoping for a version of her that might never come back. What people don't tell you about walking away is that grief comes in strange forms. Not just sadness. Sometimes it's guilt. Not for leaving, but for not leaving sooner. Sometimes it's regret, not for what you did, but for what you tolerated. And sometimes it's fear. Fear that this new life, as peaceful as it is, will always carry a shadow of what you escaped. But even shadows mean there's light. I started journaling again. Not letters. Not things meant for someone else. Just thoughts, moments, realizations. Like how I missed her laugh, but not the way she made me feel invisible. Like how love shouldn't feel like constant self-editing. Like how staying quiet to keep the peace only teaches people that your boundaries don't matter. And the more I wrote, the more I reclaimed. I wasn't writing to be heard anymore. I was writing because I finally had something to say to myself. I told myself I did everything I could. That staying didn't make me weak, it made me hopeful. That leaving didn't make me selfish, it made me alive again. And when the kids fell asleep at night, when the house was still, I didn't ache like I used to. I didn't run through what-ifs. I didn't scroll through old photos. I just sat in the quiet, and for the first time, it felt like peace instead of punishment. Maybe she would reach out. Maybe she wouldn't. But I wasn't living in the maybe anymore. I was living in the now. It started with a knock at the door. Not loud, not aggressive, just hesitant. I opened it knowing exactly who it would be, even before I saw her. She stood there like a stranger in her own story, holding nothing but a single letter in her hand. One of mine. Her eyes were tired, not from sleep, but from realization. She didn't say anything right away. Just looked at me like she was still figuring out how to speak without filters. I didn't invite her in. I waited. She finally spoke. I read all of them. I nodded once. That was enough. I didn't say, I told you. I didn't say, now you understand. There was no satisfaction in her pain, only a strange stillness. She broke the silence next, voiced in. I didn't know it got that bad. I didn't respond to that either. Because she did know. She just didn't listen. I was drowning, she added like it was a defense. So was I said. But I was still reaching for you. She looked away then. Shame has a way of folding people inward. She clutched the letter like it was a relic. Her hands trembled. I could see it now. This wasn't her trying to win me back. It was her trying to apologize without knowing how. I thought you'd always stay, she whispered. That was the problem, I said. She stepped back, gave me space. I don't expect anything. I just needed to say sorry. Not just for ignoring the letters. For ignoring you. I believed her. But sorry doesn't rewrite history. And remorse doesn't reverse damage. She asked if we could talk sometime, not about us, but about the kids. I agreed, of course. I would never shut her out of their lives. Whatever we were, she was still their mother. But the line between us was clear now. Sharp. Not cruel, just honest. That night I couldn't sleep. Not from heartbreak, but from clarity. The kind that only comes after a storm. Her apology didn't bring me comfort. It brought confirmation. That I had made the right choice. That staying would have only made both of us smaller. Days passed. Then a week. We met at a park to exchange the kids. She had made a list of things to pack: snacks, water bottles, a toy for each of them. It was more thoughtful than she'd been in a long time. Not because she was trying to impress me, but because she was trying, period. She looked at me differently now. Not like a man she resented, but like a man she finally saw. And I looked at her not with longing, but with distance. Not anger. Not bitterness. Just the distance that comes from finally standing in your own life again. She started asking questions. How the kids were adjusting. What I was doing for work. If I was seeing someone. I answered politely, briefly. No, I wasn't dating. Not because I couldn't, but because I was healing. Learning how to be whole again before inviting someone into the space I fought hard to reclaim. She admitted she'd started therapy. I didn't applaud her for it. Growth isn't a performance. But quietly I respected it. Maybe not for me, maybe not for us, but for her. For the kids. That mattered. She said something I didn't expect. I don't want to fix what we had. I want to become the kind of person who never lets it happen again. That hit harder than any apology. Because the truth is, the worst kind of heartbreak isn't the kind that ends with screaming and slamming doors. It's the kind that dissolves slowly while you're still in the room, while you're still setting the table, still pretending you're okay. And we had lived in that slow death for years. But we weren't pretending anymore. I saw it in her posture, in how she no longer filled silence with excuses. In how she stopped explaining her behavior and started owning it. I didn't need her to justify the past. I just needed her to learn from it. And maybe, finally, she was. One night, after the kids went to sleep, she texted me. Just one sentence. I see now what I couldn't see when it mattered. I didn't reply. Not out of coldness, but because sometimes silence is the only honest answer. Not all closure is a conversation. Sometimes it's a boundary. And mine was firm now. But I saved the text. Not because it meant a future with her, but because it marked the end of who she used to be. And the beginning of someone I could at least respect again. I stopped replaying the past after that. I didn't need to. The story had played out. The ending wasn't perfect, but it was clean. No more rewriting. No more hoping for a different chapter. Just acceptance. I started writing new things, Not letters, not confessions. Just stories. Fiction, sometimes. Reflections, other times. But they were for me. Not cries for attention. Not a record of pain. Just words without weight. She stayed consistent after that. Present with the kids. Thoughtful in small ways. Not overly affectionate. Not awkwardly regretful. Just present. And in that there was peace. We weren't friends. We weren't enemies. We were co-parents with a complicated history and a clean future. Because I made it clean. Because I stopped trying to make broken things beautiful and started choosing peace over performance. Love didn't win. But growth did. And sometimes, that's the better ending. Time moved differently after the dust settled. Not fast, not slow, just steady. Predictable. And for the first time in years, that wasn't boring. It was peace. The kind that doesn't demand apologies or explanations. The kind that feels like breathing without weight on your chest. I didn't hate her. That feeling burned out long ago, along with the part of me that thought love alone could fix everything. What remained between us wasn't bitterness, it was neutrality. And that, honestly, was healthier than the fake closeness we pretended to have for years. The kids adjusted beautifully. Their lives became split between two homes, but they never felt divided. I made sure of it. She did too. Whatever else we got wrong, we agreed on one thing: our children would never be collateral damage. There were still small, awkward moments. A shared look at a school event. Brief silence during a drop-off. But they were just that, moments. They passed. We didn't linger in them. We both knew lingering led to questions with answers we no longer owed each other. I built a rhythm in my new life. Mornings with the kids. Work. Evening walks. Reading instead of overthinking. Cooking without wondering if someone would complain about the seasoning. Folding laundry in silence that wasn't cold, it was calm. I laughed more. Smiled easier. Not for show, not to prove anything. Just because I could. People started noticing. A friend asked, "You seem lighter." I just nodded. No long explanation. Some things are felt more than said. I had carried a quiet sadness for so long I didn't realize how loud it had become. Now, that sadness was gone, and in its place was clarity. I began reconnecting with parts of myself that had been shelved. Hobbies I abandoned. Friendships I let go of. Dreams I had tucked away, convincing myself they were impractical. They weren't. I was just tired back then. Tired of justifying my joy to someone who measured everything I did through her own discontent. Now, I didn't ask for permission to be happy. I just was. Eventually, I met someone. Slowly. Carefully. She wasn't a rebound. She wasn't a distraction. She was kind. Curious. Emotionally present in a way that felt effortless. She asked questions and actually listened to the answers. She didn't flinch when I talked about the past. She didn't try to fix me. She just sat with me in whatever space I was in. We didn't rush. I made sure of that. I wasn't building a new life on top of old ruins. I was planting something new in clear, solid ground. She met the kids after months. I didn't introduce her as someone special. Just as someone I trusted. That mattered more than titles. And the kids? They responded to energy, not roles. They liked her because she saw them. Really saw them. Not as extensions of me or reminders of a failed marriage. Just as two little people who deserved attention and warmth. My ex found out through the kids. She didn't ask questions. She didn't make snide remarks. Just a short text one night. "I hope she's good to them." I replied. "She is." Nothing more needed to be said. That was growth. Not dramatic, not loud. Just quiet mutual understanding. We were both living different stories now. Separate, but aligned where it counted. There were no late-night phone calls. No drunken messages. No emotional relapses. We didn't try to reopen wounds. We just let the scars settle. And in that decision, we found something close to peace. One day, I came across the last letter I wrote her. The one I left behind before taking the kids. I had a copy on my old hard drive. I read it again, not out of pain, but curiosity. It was raw. Honest. Desperate in a way. But not weak. It was the letter of a man at his edge, choosing not to fall but to walk away with dignity. I didn't feel that man anymore. I respected him. I thanked him. He gave me the life I have now. But I wasn't him anymore. I was healed. The hardest part of healing is forgiving yourself for staying as long as you did. For not leaving the first time you were made to feel small. For believing love had to hurt to be real. But I had forgiven him, me. Fully. I looked at my reflection and didn't see survival anymore. I saw freedom. And here's the truth: love doesn't always conquer all. Sometimes, it's just the beginning of a lesson. Sometimes, love is the storm you crawl out of so you can finally see the sun. Sometimes, it breaks you so you can rebuild. She and I will never be what we were. And that's a good thing. We weren't right. We were familiar. And familiarity isn't the same as love. It's just a habit. A comfort zone wrapped in history. But from that wreckage, something better was built. For her. For me. For the kids. Now, I measure love differently. Not by longevity. Not by sacrifice. But by peace. By consistency. By how I feel when I come home, when I speak, when I exist in the presence of someone else. And now, I feel safe. I feel respected. I feel seen. There are no perfect endings. But there are honest ones. And this was ours. Not a tragedy. Not a fairy tale. Just a clean chapter closed, and a new one started, written in ink we both chose not to smear again.